All right, so get ready because we're going deep today. We're diving into personal identity from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And, you're obviously here because you want to really understand what it means to be a person, right?
Yeah.
Not just like the everyday stuff, but the real philosophical nitty-gritty.
Yeah, and this source material, it doesn't mess around. It goes way beyond just defining the word person.
Oh yeah, we're going way deeper than a simple definition. We're talking about how we persist over time, how we know who's who, heck, even what matters when it comes to surviving.
It really is a whole network of interconnected questions.
And the source material dives right into that complexity. It breaks down personal identity into 7 distinct problems.
Yeah,
7. Most people don't even realize it's that nuanced.
it's true. And it's easy to get those different aspects mixed up. Like when someone's having an identity crisis, they're not usually questioning if they exist.
Right, exactly.
Mm.
It's more about who am I as a person?
Mm.
What defines me?
It's about their character, their values, their goals, their place in the world. That's the characterization question.
But then we get to the really big one, persistence.
Yeah.
What makes you the same you over time? What makes you the same person you were yesterday?
That's the core of it. Are we talking about one single being over time? Or different beings that are related in some way?
Whoa. Okay, so just to be clear here, we're not assuming people have to be people the whole time, are we? In the philosophical sense?
Not at all. I mean, think about it. You might have existed as an embryo, right? Or maybe something non-physical, who knows?
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
And another thing to remember, persistence isn't about staying the same kind of thing, like staying a student or a lawyer, that kind of thing.
So it's not about my job or even my personality staying the same.
Right. It's about numerical identity. Is it the same entity at different points in time?
Okay. So someone could change careers, change their whole personality, even their entire worldview, and still be the same individual. Wow. Okay, so then how do we know if someone is the same person they were yesterday? I mean, is it their memories? What if they have amnesia or something?
Yeah.
Or is it just their physical appearance? What if that changes drastically?
That's the evidence problem. What evidence do we trust? And how do we weigh things when they conflict?
Yeah, that's a good point. Imagine someone claiming to be, I don't know, Cleopatra reincarnated.
Yeah.
Do we just take their word for it?
Exactly. Do we believe their memories? Or do we need something more?
Man, my brain's already hurting. And then the source material throws even more curveballs at us. The population question, personal ontology, what matters in survival.
It's a lot. Like the population question, how many selves are there at any given time?
Oh, wow, yeah. With split brain patients or multiple personalities, that gets really complicated.
It does. And then personal ontology. What are we fundamentally? Are we physical, non-physical, some kind of combination?
Right, and if we figure that out, then it's
Right.
why should we even care about our future selves if we even do continue to exist?
It gets into our values, what matters to us. What if you could be replaced with a perfect duplicate? Would it even matter?
All right. We've clearly got a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
7 distinct problems within personal identity, and that's just the beginning. So where do we even start?
Well, I think the source material's got it right, starting with persistence. It really is the core of the whole thing. And there are some common misconceptions we need to clear up first.
Okay, let's do it. What are some of those misunderstandings about persistence?
Well, firstly, this isn't about defining the word person. It's about what it takes for any being to persist, regardless of what we call it.
Right, so we're not just talking about humans here.
Exactly. We're talking about the very nature of continued existence for, well, anything, really.
Got it. Anything else?
Another misconception is that persistence means staying the same kind of thing, like we talked about before, remaining a student or a lawyer.
Right. Is not what we're talking about.
It's about numerical identity.
Yeah.
Is it that same entity at different points in time?
Okay, so someone could change careers, change their whole personality, their entire outlook on life, and still be the same individual, numerically speaking.
Exactly.
All right, got it. So with those misconceptions out of the way, what are the main contenders for explaining persistence?
Well, the source material lays out 3 main views: psychological continuity views, brute physical views, and anti-criterialism. Each of them has their own take on what it means for something to persist over time.
All right, so 3 different approaches. Let's start with the first one, psychological continuity. This one seems pretty intuitive to me.
Yeah.
You persist because of your connected stream of thoughts, your memories, your personality, all that good stuff, right?
Right. It's definitely the most popular view among contemporary philosophers. The idea is a future being is you if they inherit the right mental features from you. And same goes for past beings.
Okay, so like if I can remember being a kid, then that kid was me because those memories are part of my psychological continuity.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. But there's a lot of debate about what kind of inheritance counts. Does it have to be a single unbroken chain? Does it have to be based on, actual physical connections in the brain?
So even within psychological continuity, there are different interpretations.
Absolutely. There are nuances and complexities we need to explore.
All right, well, let's just start with the basics then. Let's think about that classic brain transplant thought experiment.
Yes, a classic.
If your brain was put into a new body, wouldn't you wake up in that new body? Wouldn't your consciousness just be transferred over?
That's the intuition behind psychological continuity views, yeah? The idea that the core of who we are, our essence, lies in our mental lives, not our physical bodies.
But of course, philosophy is never that simple,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What are some problems with this seemingly straightforward view?
Oh, there are a few. One challenge is the memory criterion, and it's got some pretty famous pitfalls.
Okay, so the idea is that you are the person whose experiences you can remember. What's wrong with that?
Well, for one thing, memory isn't always transitive. You might remember being a teenager, and that teenager might remember being a child, but you might not have any direct memories of being a child. Does that mean you're not the same person you were as a child?
Well, no, that seems kind of illogical. There has to be a more solid connection than that. What else is wrong with just relying on memory?
Well, you can only remember your experiences, right?
Oh.
So saying you persist because you remember your past might be circular reasoning. We need to already know it's your experience to count it as memory.
Okay, that's a good point. So using memory alone to define persistence doesn't quite work. Does the source material offer any, like, fixes for this memory problem?
They do. One idea is quasi-memory, which is basically memory without requiring sameness of identity.
Quasi-memory. So I could have quasi-memories of things that happened to, like, my great-grandparents.
Exactly. It would let you remember things that happened to someone else as long as there's the right kind of psychological connection.
Huh. Okay, so what kind of psychological connection are we talking about here? Like, does it have to be genetic or something else?
That's where things get tricky. And, even with quasi-memory, we still run into the issue of unconsciousness. We don't remember what happens when we're asleep, but surely we don't cease to exist every time we doze off, right?
Right, of course. So is there a way to define psychological continuity that goes beyond simple memory, something that accounts for unconsciousness and all the other weird stuff?
Yeah, the source material points us toward a more sophisticated version, one that relies on causal dependence rather than just memory.
Right, causal dependence. Lay it on me.
Think of it this way. It's not just about what you consciously remember. It's about all the complex ways our current mental states are caused by our past selves.
Okay, I think I'm following. So even though I might not remember everything from my childhood, those experiences still shaped who I am today. They caused this chain reaction of mental states that's still continuing right now.
Precisely. And that chain of causal dependence is what constitutes psychological continuity, even through periods of unconsciousness. It's about how our mental lives are interconnected over time.
This is making me think about, like, the nature of the self. Is it something that's constantly changing? Or is there some kind of core that remains the same?
Excellent questions. Those get to the heart of the debate. And, even this fancier version of psychological continuity with causal dependence still faces challenges. The source material goes into some really mind-bending scenarios like brain state transfer.
Brain state transfer, that sounds intense.
What if we could copy your entire mental state onto a computer? Or even into another brain?
Okay, now we're getting into some serious sci-fi territory.
Right. Would that count as genuine psychological continuity? Would you wake up in that new form?
I mean, that's a huge question. Like, would it really be me or just a copy?
That's a question that even psychological continuity theorists disagree on. Some argue it would be you, essentially transferring your consciousness. Others say it's just a copy, not the real you.
So even with causal dependence, there are still these gray areas. It makes you wonder if we can really define ourselves based on psychological factors alone.
And that leads us to maybe the most intriguing challenge to psychological continuity. The fission problem.
Or fission problem. All right, I'm intrigued.
What happens if your brain is split and each half is put into a new body?
Oh, wow. Okay, so like there are now two of me running around.
Right. Are there two of you? Does one survive and the other die? Or do you cease to exist altogether?
That's a mind-blowing question. I mean,
Yeah.
imagine waking up and finding out there's another version of you out there.
It's a problem with no easy answers, at least not within the framework of psychological continuity. The source material lays out two main responses from theorists: the multiple occupancy view and the non-branching view.
Okay, break it down for me. Let's start with multiple occupancy. What's that all about?
Well, multiple occupancy suggests that there were actually two of you all along, just overlapping in the same body.
Whoa. So like two consciousnesses sharing the same space.
Exactly. And when a brain is split, those two selves just become distinct.
So it's like two threads of consciousness all woven together. And then suddenly they unravel.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. And this view is often connected to the idea of temporal parts, which is a whole other philosophical rabbit hole.
Maybe we can save that rabbit hole for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
For now, I'm curious about the other response to the fission problem. The non-branching view. What's the gist of that one?
The non-branching view argues that you only persist if there's a single continuous line of psychological descent. So in the fission case, neither of the resulting individuals would be you. They'd both be new beings, and you would cease to exist.
Whoa. So fission equals death. That seems a bit harsh. Wouldn't it be better for, both parts of your brain to survive, even if they're in different bodies?
That's a common reaction, and it leads to some really interesting questions about what truly matters in survival. If you could choose between having one half of your brain survive in a new body or having both halves survive in separate bodies, what would you choose and why?
That's a seriously deep question. It makes you think about your priorities, what you truly value about your own existence. Is it just about numerical identity, or is it something more?
Exactly. The non-branching view, with its emphasis on a single line of descent, forces us to confront these questions head-on. Maybe what matters isn't our numerical identity, but the continuation of our psychological states, regardless of who's experiencing them.
Man, this is heavy stuff. We've covered a lot of ground. From memory and causal dependence to brain transplants and now the fission problem.
It's a lot to take in, but we're just getting started.
Oh boy, I'm always afraid to ask, but what's next?
Next time, we'll delve into the too many thinkers problem. That's where things get really interesting. And then we'll explore an entirely different way of thinking about persistence. The brute physical view. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into personal identity. Last time, we really left off with a bang, didn't we? That whole fission problem, splitting brains, multiple selves, it was a lot.
Yeah, definitely some mind-bending stuff. It really makes you question what we think we know about the self.
For sure. But you said there's another challenge to psychological continuity we need to tackle, something called the too many thinkers objection, right?
Exactly. It's a pretty fundamental problem for any view that says our minds are what make us persist over time.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is this too many thinkers problem all about?
Well, it starts with a simple question. If our minds define who we are, and our bodies are also capable of thinking, doesn't that mean there are two thinkers wherever there's a person?
Two thinkers, one person. I'm already feeling a little confused. How does this challenge psychological continuity exactly?
Think about it. You're sitting here listening to this deep dive. According to psychological continuity, you're the entity defined by your thoughts, your memories, all that good stuff. But what about your body? That living, breathing organism that's also sitting there.
I mean, yeah, my body's here too, obviously.
Yeah.
But I don't think of it as a separate thinker.
But why not? It's alive, it's responding to its environment, it's even regulating its own internal processes. If we're saying that having a certain kind of mental life is what makes you you, then why wouldn't your body also count?
Okay, so the too many thinkers objection is basically saying that psychological continuity can't really explain the relationship between our minds and our bodies because it ends up treating them as two separate thinkers.
Exactly, and that leads to some really uncomfortable implications. For one, it means we're not actually our bodies. There's a separate us, the thinking mind, and a separate body, both capable of thought.
So like some kind of mind-body dualism. That seems a little strange, to be honest. Yeah. It does, doesn't it? And it gets weirder. The second consequence is that if personhood is all about having certain mental capacities, things like rationality, self-awareness, then our bodies might actually qualify as persons too. Wait, so now we have two thinkers and potentially two people wherever there's one person. This is getting out of control.
It is, isn't it? And it gets even trickier. Because that brings us to the third and perhaps most troubling consequence, the epistemic problem. If there are two thinkers sharing your body, how can you be sure which one you are?
Uh, it's like that duplicating machine thought experiment. If you suddenly have two of you, how do you know which one is the original?
Exactly. And with the too many thinkers problem, the stakes are even higher. Because you're not just questioning your history, you're questioning the very essence of your being. Are you a mind or are you an organism?
So this too many thinkers problem really throws a wrench into things
Yep.
for psychological continuity. What do defenders of this view say about it? I mean, they can't just ignore it, right?
Of course not. There are a few ways they try to address it. One common defense is to simply deny that organisms can think. They say that despite all appearances, our bodies are just complex biological machines running on autopilot, not truly conscious or aware in the way that we are.
So they're saying that the body is just a vehicle for the mind, and that the real thinking only happens in the non-physical mind.
Right. But of course, that raises a lot of its own questions, like why couldn't organisms be conscious? And it leads to all sorts of thought experiments about philosophical zombies, beings that are physically identical to us, but lack any inner experience.
Yeah, the idea of my body being a zombie is a little creepy. I'm not sure I buy that one. Are there other ways to tackle the too many thinkers problem? Ones that don't require philosophical zombies?
There are. Another response focuses on the concepts of personhood and first-person reference. Basically, the idea is that just having certain mental capacities isn't enough to make you a person. You also need to persist in the right way through psychological continuity.
Okay, so it's not enough to be a thinker. You have to be a thinker that persists through this specific kind of psychological connection.
Right. So this view would say that even if our bodies are capable of some kind of basic thought, they're not persons because they don't persist in the right way.
They persist through, well, just existing physically, right? Not through this chain of psychological states.
Exactly. So that gets rid of the two people problem. But what about that epistemic problem we talked about? How do I know that I'm the person and not my body?
Yeah, that's a big one. How do I know I'm not just mistakenly identifying with the wrong thinker?
That's where first-person reference comes in. This view argues that when you say or think I, you're not referring to the organism, but to the person, the entity that's defined by psychological continuity. So even if your body is generating thoughts, it's not generating your thoughts.
Hmm. Interesting. So even if my body is doing some thinking, those aren't my thoughts because I'm the person, the one defined by psychological continuity.
Exactly. And because your body isn't a person, it can't have first-person thoughts about itself. It can't mistakenly think it's you.
Okay, that's a pretty clever way to sidestep the epistemic problem.
Uh,
So we've got these two main defenses of psychological continuity against the too many thinkers,
hmm.
denying that organisms think and restricting personhood to those who persist through psychological continuity.
But didn't you say there was a third, even more radical approach?
I did. There's a view called new animalism that flips the script entirely. It says, hold on, maybe organisms do persist through psychological continuity.
Whoa, really? So instead of separating the mind and body, new animalism finds a way for both to persist together.
Exactly. Think of a brain transplant as more of a radical reconstruction of the organism. You're not moving a brain from one body to another. You're taking an organism, reducing it to its essence, the brain, and then giving it a whole new set of parts.
It's like an extreme makeover for the organism.
I love it. And if organisms can persist through that kind of radical reconstruction, then maybe they can persist through psychological continuity after all. This is making me rethink the whole brain transplant scenario. We don't think a person stops existing if they get a heart transplant or a new limb. Maybe a brain transplant is just a more extreme version of that.
That's the thinking behind new animalism. And if that's the case, then the too many thinkers objection might not be as damaging to psychological continuity as we initially thought.
Okay, so we've gone through all the ins and outs of psychological continuity and its responses to the too many thinkers problem. But I know there's another major contender we need to discuss. Brute physical views. What can you tell me about those?
Brute physical views take a much more straightforward approach. They argue that what makes you persist is the continued existence of your physical body, regardless of what's happening in your mental life.
So it's not about thoughts, memories, personality, all that. It's just about the physical stuff.
Exactly. And this view is often paired with animalism, the idea that we as persons are essentially biological organisms.
So animalism says we are our bodies, and brute physical views say our bodies are what persists through time. They fit together nicely.
They do. And this combined approach has a certain simplicity to it. It aligns with our everyday experience of ourselves as physical beings. We're born, we grow old, and eventually we die. Plus, it avoids all those brain-splitting dilemmas we talked about with psychological continuity.
No more multiple cells, no more
Yeah.
worrying about branching timelines. You are your body. And as long as your body keeps going, so do you. Simple as that.
Simpler, at least. But of course, it has its own set of challenges. The most common objection to brute physical views and to animalism by extension is, you guessed it, the brain transplant problem.
Ah, yes. The brain transplant. That seems to be the ultimate test for all these theories.
Uh,
So how does this problem apply to the brute physical view?
well, if my brain is put into your body, brute physical views would say that you end up with my brain, and I get left behind an empty shell.
Yeah, and that just feels wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
intuitively, it seems like I would be the one waking up in your body. My thoughts, my memories, everything that makes me me would be going along for the ride.
That's the core of the objection. Our intuitions about brain transplants seem to really favor psychological continuity over brute physical persistence.
So how do proponents of brute physical views respond? How do they defend their position against this seemingly powerful intuition?
They acknowledge that it's a strong intuition, but they argue it's not decisive. They point out that our intuitions can be misleading in these philosophical thought experiments. Sometimes the most obvious answer isn't the right one.
Yeah, that's fair. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper to get to the truth of the matter.
Exactly. And they offer some counter-arguments. Some animalists suggest that maybe a brain transplant is more like a liver transplant than we realize. It's not about transferring a person from one body to another. It's about giving a body a new part.
So the brain isn't the seat of the self, it's just another organ, like the heart or the lungs.
Precisely. And another counter-argument is that it's not obvious that the brain recipient is the same person as the brain donor. Maybe the transplant creates an entirely new individual. Or maybe it just results in the death of both the donor and the recipient.
Wow, those are some pretty thought-provoking responses. It definitely makes the brain transplant scenario a lot more complicated than it seems at first glance. So even though brute physical views have this intuitive appeal of simplicity, they still have to grapple with these complex questions.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how deeply intertwined these debates about personal identity are with our understanding of the mind, the body, and even the nature of life and death.
All right, welcome back to our final deep dive into the philosophy of personal identity. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Brain transplants, multiple selves, the idea that our bodies might be thinking things.
Yeah.
It's all been very thought-provoking.
It really has. We've dug deep into some really complex questions about what it means to be a person and what makes us who we are.
And as we've seen, this isn't just some isolated philosophical puzzle, right?
Yeah.
It connects to all these bigger questions about the nature of reality and our place in it.
Exactly. Remember those two main views we discussed, psychological continuity and brute physical views? Well, the debate between them goes way beyond just personal identity. It touches on metaphysics, epistemology, even the philosophy of language.
Okay, so how does personal identity tie into all those other areas of philosophy? It seems like everything's connected.
It really is. Let's start with the nature of mental properties. If you're going to say that organisms can't think, like some psychological continuity theorists do, then you need to explain what thinking is and why organisms wouldn't qualify.
So we're talking about the philosophy of mind here. What does it mean to have a mind? What are mental properties? How do they relate to the physical world?
Right. And then if you accept that organisms can think, like the too many thinkers objection suggests, you've got another problem. How do we know that we're not our bodies?
That's a good point. How can I be sure I'm not just mistakenly identifying with the wrong thinker?
That takes us right into epistemology. How do we know anything about ourselves? What makes our first-person perspective unique?
Wow, so figuring out who we are is also about figuring out how we know anything at all. It seems like everything in philosophy really is interconnected.
It really is. And then you've got the philosophy of language. What do we even mean when we say I? Does it always refer to the same thing? Or could it sometimes refer to the person, sometimes the organism, maybe sometimes a collection of temporal parts?
Okay, wait a minute. Temporal parts again. It seems like this view of time, where we're made up of all these individual slices, really complicates things.
It really does. If we accept this view of time, then there are all sorts of candidates for you at any given moment. There's the organism, the psychologically continuous self, the collection of temporal parts connected by psychological states.
So instead of one me, there's like a whole committee of me's.
Right. It gets very complicated.
But seriously, how do we determine which one is the real me if we're thinking about ourselves in terms of these temporal slices?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the source material suggests there might not be a single right answer. It could be what philosophers call indeterminate. There's just no clear way to decide which one is the true you.
So after all this deep diving, are we left with more questions than answers? It seems like we've barely scratched the surface of this personal identity problem.
That's often the way it goes in philosophy. It's not always about finding definitive answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions, exploring the complexity. And I think even though we haven't solved the mystery of personal identity, we've gained a much deeper understanding of all the different ways we can think about it.
I agree. We've gone from brain transplants to multiple cells to temporal parts, and it's all connected in these amazing ways.
Right. It's all part of the bigger philosophical picture. And I think that's what's important to take away from this deep dive. These questions about who we are have big implications. They make us rethink our assumptions about the mind, knowledge, language, even reality itself.
It's like this one topic unlocks a whole universe of philosophical inquiry.
I love that. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. The source material puts it like this. If personal identity is so complex, maybe even indeterminate, what does that mean for our ideas of responsibility and morality? What does it mean for the value of our own lives?
That's a huge question. If we can't even pinpoint who we are, how can we hold ourselves accountable for our actions? Or figure out what makes a life meaningful?
Right. It challenges a lot of our basic ethical intuitions.
That's definitely a lot to think about. But that's what we do here on the Deep Dive, right? We push the boundaries of our thinking and leave our listeners with new questions to explore.
Absolutely. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into these big ideas.
And until next time, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.